Top 5 week coming to a conclusion on this Friday morning. Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy Football. Today, it is time to talk about the top 5 tight ends in the consensus rankings. Can you guess who tight end 1 is? I'm Adam Azer. I got Chris Towers and Dan Schneier joining me today. Yesterday, we recorded a Beyond the Box Score episode. You will hear that. You can watch it now on YouTube, youtube.com/fantasyfootballtoday, or you can hear it on Saturday. It will drop on Saturday. Also, there will be a Tuesday, July 4th Dynasty episode, so get excited about that. Chris, early happy birthday to you on July 4th. I hope you have you're going to take like a big long weekend?
The way our holiday works out is we have to work Monday, and then we're off Tuesday. It's not ideal. I would, not complaining. I love a day off, but
take a day off,
I work Sunday through Thursday too, so I got to work 2 days and then get my day out. It's fine. It's fine. It's no big deal.
When's your birthday, Chris? I didn't even
July
know
4th.
Oh my God, that's your birthday? Wow.
I was like 12.
Birthday.
I was like 12 before I realized that the fireworks were not for me.
All right, so we got to talk tight ends here. A couple of news items on offensive linemen, and I'm going to try to read your Apple Podcast questions. I do appreciate all of the Apple Podcast submissions. The problem is the podcast app is not really working very well, so I can't read them. So I'm trying to read them another way, and I'm working on that. Hopefully I can make that happen before the end of the show. We'll get into the consensus rankings in a little bit. Let me just ask you this, Chris. You can start. Who is tight end 3 for you? Unless there's any crazy shakeup with Kelsey and Andrews, I'm going to assume as 1 and 2. Who's tight end 3?
Yeah, I thought we were going to start with the controversy at Travis Kelsey, number 1. No, number 3 is, I think, a boring pick. It's TJ Hawkinson for me. And it's kind of, he's the set it and forget it tight end. And there's value in having a guy who is probably going to score like 12 points most weeks, even though I don't think there's a ton of upside there. But I just, the gap between him and the other guys in terms of safety is what gives him the edge there.
Dan, who's tight end 3 for you?
Darren Waller is my tight end 3. Should I get into it now, or are we going to dive into this in the show?
No, go ahead. This is the time.
Well, I mean, I'll do the basis of the argument now, and I'll get more into the details in a little bit later. But the basis of the argument for me with Darren Waller is, out of all these tight ends that we're looking into, and if I'm going to invest in any of these top 5 tight ends, I want a difference maker on a weekly basis. I want someone who's going to give me a weekly edge. And I feel that outside of Kelsey and Andrews, even Andrews I'm a little more skeptical about, but there are some good things about, even though there's a little bit more target competition there, there is a chance for a better pass rate there, I think, with Monken. And I'll get into that why later. But with Waller, this is the best chance you're going to get outside of Kelsey of getting a top target getter on an offense at tight end. Darren Waller's already had 2 seasons of 1,000+ yards. The Giants have no receiver on the Giants roster has 1,000 yards season under his belt right now. Not one. And that includes Sterling Shepard, who's been with the team for like 6 years, but it's never come close to 1,000 yards. So I'm looking at a guy who in 2 seasons before the last 2 injured seasons, which we know happened, had 90+ receptions, over 1,100 yards in each season, 12 touchdowns combined in those 2 seasons. So I like his upside a lot more than TJ Hawkinson's. And a lot more than Dallas Goedert, George Kittle, and all the guys behind him as well.
And you didn't mention the guy that I would have as tight end 3, and that's Kyle Pitts. And
Chris, well, that's my thought.
I thought that's who you had.
I'm finally out on Pitts.
I have Pitts at number 4, and if you're going to make the case for Darren Waller, I feel like and this is kind of the opposite of what I usually do, because I kind of usually go against the mystery box versus a boat. I usually just go with the boat, but in this case, we don't actually know what Darren Waller is at this point in his career. He's 31 years old. He's missed, math in my head is not really working right now. He's missed like 17 games over the past 2 seasons.
14 games.
14 games with recurring hamstring issues.
No, one was a hamstring, one was a knee. The 1 year was only a knee.
Even better. 2 different injuries. And he's going to be 31 in week 2 of this season.
Sell high after week.
Tight ends age pretty well, though, in the NFL. Not to mention, I think there is something to be said about somebody who didn't break onto the scene until later in his career. Obviously, those probably are well aware now of like his issues off the field with drugs and rehab and things like that. And he was the late breakout in the first place. So there's less tread on the tires there. I'm not really worried at all about the age factor. Maybe the reoccurring injuries, maybe a little bit, but they weren't the same injuries. So I kind of feel like this narrative is a little bit overblown to me.
I think it's just kind of a lot of different issues, right? It's changing teams. We don't know exactly how he's going to be used. That's not a negative, right? I do think he'll be the number one option on the Giants, but it's an unknown. It's a relative unknown. Then you have the injury issues. Then you have the age question, and also he wasn't as good last year. You know, we've seen a steady decline in his play, 75 yards per game in 2021 or 2020, 61 in 2021, 43 last year. It feels like where Adam Thielen was a couple of seasons ago.
I don't know about
where
that.
Like in 2020, Adam Thielen was still productive, right? 925 yards, 14 touchdowns, was still, I think, a high-end wide receiver 2 for fantasy. But there were signs, right? The per game production had slipped in consecutive years. He had missed a bunch of time. He was going into his age 31 season in 2021, and it was like, yeah, but he's still a solid wide receiver too, right? Still a great opportunity. And it's like, yeah, but once we see the signs of decline and once we see the injuries for a guy in his 30s, it's just like, it's not a guarantee that things are going to go wrong, but it's a lot of red flags for me. I've got Darren Waller as my tight end 6, and I think the gap between 3 and 7 is basically non-existent, and I think you can put them in any order. And so it's mostly just upside versus downside, risk versus reward. And I think I go Hawkinson 3, Pitts 4, which is basically just safety versus upside.
I like that argument because it is true that as they get, as your receivers or tight ends, whatever position you're going to go for is getting older, there's more of a chance of injury, especially with these reoccurring ones. I will say this as far as the yards per game goes and the dip in production. Devontae Adams entered the picture last year, and similar to the Thielen situation, Justin Jefferson entered the picture. There is no Adams, there is no Jefferson on the Giants outside of Waller. This is by far and away their best target getter, and he's been so far in OTAs. I mean, that's nothing to brag about. It's early, but as that training camp buzz builds, he's been moved all over the formation, used as the 1 in the 3x1 sets in the backfield. Like, they're getting him the football early. So we'll see. I mean, I definitely get the concern with the age. I think the target thing is a little bit more I guess, different in the Giants situation now with Waller than it was for Thielen with Jefferson and I guess last year Waller with Adams.
Yeah. And I think Pitts has just as good of a chance to have a huge target season. I mean, he was on pace for 100 targets last year on an offense that barely threw the ball and threw it extremely poorly. And actually, you haven't heard the episode yet, but unless you watched it on YouTube, but Jacob Gibbs outlined it yesterday on Beyond the Box Score, which we'll publish on Saturday. The situation really could not have been much worse for Kyle Pitts. Marcus Mariota was the most inaccurate deep ball thrower in the NFL last year. Pitts had a very high ADOT. It was a terrible combination. But I think the thing that Chris said, I don't know if we all feel this way, but Chris, I feel exactly the same way. The gap between 3 and 7 at the tight end position is very small. If anyone wants to argue for Waller, for Pitts, for Goddard, for Kittle, or for Hawkinson as tight end 3, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I think you should just wait and take close to the last one. I don't see any justification for Hawkinson having an ADP at 41 and Waller having an ADP at 77, Goddard at 71, Pitts at 70, Kittle at 57. The consensus of Hawkinson being tight end 3, it doesn't really make sense to me. Like, there should be more debate and more division on that.
Yes.
And they should all be really grouped together. I think Chris thinks. Dan, you agree?
Completely agree. But we can get into a little bit later, but I have massive reservations about TJ Hawkinson this year.
Yeah, me too. I mean, he's just,
especially now that I heard he's 41 overall. I did not know that. I haven't been following the ADP as closely. There's not a chance in hell I would use the 41st pick on TJ Hawkinson right now.
But I'm not sure there's a chance in hell I'd use the 41st pick on any of those 5 tight
ends.
Yeah, no, I think the way you do it is you just you rank that tier, and if you want one of them, whichever one's left when you pick in the 7th round or 6th round, whatever, however what you want to do that, I think is the way to go. Because I think, in my projections, I've got a tight end 3 is 208 points, tight end 7 is 198. They're separated by 10 points. There's a big gap between Kelsey and everyone else. Obviously, it's like 4 points per game. And then it's like 2 points per game between Andrews and everyone else.
Maybe Andrews is the one we need to spend a lot of time talking on. Is he worth the 3rd round pick? And we will get to that a little bit later. So I'll just tell you a little bit about what's coming up. We have, so next week you're going to have the Dynasty show on Tuesday. But beginning the week after that, we'll still have the Dynasty show, but you will have 5 episodes per week of just regular redraft content. We still will have the Dynasty show. It's not going anywhere. It's just maybe a different day, or, we have other plans, but that Dynasty content will still exist, but we're going to keep ramping up our redraft coverage as well. FFT in 5 is going strong, hosted by Chris Towers. So please check that out. If you want a list of all of our podcasts, go to cbssports.com/podcasts. A couple of news items here and not insignificant suspensions. Jacksonville left tackle Cam Robinson, he's suspended for 4 games for violating the PED policy. He's their starter. And Tennessee offensive tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere is suspended 6 games for what was that?
Gambling.
Okay. Yeah. Good. I didn't want to say something worse than that, for the gambling policy. So that's a Titans offensive lineman starter, an offensive tackle, and they already have offensive line issues. Should we change any rankings at all, Chris Towers, based on Cam Robinson for the Jaguars out 4 games, Nicholas Petit-Frere out 6 games for Tennessee?
I don't think so. Obviously the fact that it's the first 4 games of the season, and then you don't know what are the first 6 games of the season in Petit-Frere's case, you don't know what shape they're going to come back in. It's not a guarantee that they'll, after missing that time, be themselves. But I think it would be an overreaction to move anyone down. It's only part of the season, so I think it's okay.
Yeah, good. I don't think we need to spend any more time on this, Dan. I'm good. We just do tight ends. Good. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Let's get to the tight ends. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. The rest of the show will be tight ends. Hopefully some questions at the end. We'll be right back. All right, our consensus top 5, looking at the combination of Jamie, Dave, and Heath's rankings. And none of them are on the show today, so that's great. The consensus top 5 is Kelsey, Andrews, Hockenson, Pitts, Goddard. I know that's top 4 is Chris's. Kelsey, Andrews, Hockenson, Pitts. Who's number 5 for you, Chris?
Goddard. He's number 5, and Goddard's one that, if he was the number 2 option in that offense, I think he'd be the clear number 3 tight end, and maybe the number 2. He's been so efficient since getting a larger role in that offense, and it seems like there are 3 times every game where he's just wide open with nobody within 15 yards of him. It's amazing what they're able to do for him in terms of his role in the screen game, his ability to get open downfield. Everything he does in that offense is just really, really valuable, but it's just kind of a math problem. Can you get him to 70 yards per game? I don't think so. I think it's really hard to get there unless something happens to Devontae Smith or AJ Brown and they miss significant time, but we're not hoping for that. And so I just kind of think where he's at, 60 yards per game, right around 950 to 1,000 yards in a full season, that's probably what he is. And also, he's got some crazy low target number in the red zone over the past 2 seasons. It's 6 red zone targets over the past 2 seasons or something. I'll look that up and confirm, but I saw that the other day.
And I think if you even took out the Gardner Minshew games, it's probably even worse. But it's a weird, quirky, maybe not sustainable stat for Goddard. Should regress. Dan, what's your top 5? Because Chris and the consensus are Kelsey, Andrews, Hockenson, Pitts, Goddard.
Yeah, I have Kelsey, Andrews, Waller. Then I have Hockenson and then Goddard. I'll make my case for why I'm really concerned with TJ Hockenson this year. So TJ Hockenson, he comes over from the trade from the Lions. From that point until that point, we had pretty much discussed him as a bust, right? He was a top first round draft pick in the NFL. Never really did much after the catch. Never really showed us much as a talent. I remember the 2 seasons ago where me and Chris were way off on him. We said we couldn't understand his 5th round value, and he had that bad year. And then he breaks out with the Vikings. But look at this breakout with the Vikings. In 2 games last year against the same exact team, TJ Hockenson had 58.8 PPR points. That was against the Giants. He had in week 16, 13 for 109 with 2 touchdowns. And in the wildcard game, he had 10 for 129, 16 targets, 11 targets. Besides that, he averages 13 PPR points per game. Here's his stat lines with the Vikings, this breakout Vikings. 9 for taking out the Giants games. 9 for 70, 7 for 45, 5 for 34, 5 for 43 and a touchdown. The only touchdown he had outside of his 2-touchdown game against the Giants. Just 3 touchdowns in this span with the Vikings. 4 for 33, 6 for 67, 3 for 33, 7 for 59. And then you got the 2 Giants games. I mean, to me, that is just not what I want to invest in, especially after you add Jordan Addison in the first round, who, in my opinion, is going to almost immediately earn more targets than TJ Hawkinson. Within the progression of a read, you are looking for Jordan Addison, who can get open immediately before you're looking for TJ Hawkinson. By default, they had to go to TJ Hawkinson last year. Like Chris said, Adam Thielen on his last legs, not running the same good routes, playing hurt, wasn't getting open. Jordan Addison's going to get open. So now I'm even adding to the mix potential loss of these targets that weren't even really there outside of those 2 Giants games where the Giants play bracket coverage and like triple team Justin Jefferson. It just seems to me like we're investing way too much in a guy who's not scoring a lot of touchdowns, maybe losing targets, didn't even really get that many targets to begin with if you take out those 2 Giants games. I don't know. I just look at that and I just am scared. When I saw the difference between the Giants games and the rest of his games with the Vikings, it was pretty scary for me.
It is funny that like we talk about the breakout for TJ Hawkinson, and he averaged more yards per game when he was with the Lions than he was with the Vikings. And that's misleading. That's misleading because 179 of his yards. But this is TJ Hawkinson. This is who he's been basically since he stepped foot on the NFL. This is so indicative. Week 3, 18 yards. Week 4, 179 yards. Week 5, 6. I think he might have left week 5 with an injury, maybe, if I'm remembering correctly. But either way, like, that's been him. Remember, I think his second game in the NFL as a rookie was a massive game, or his first game, something like that. And then he immediately fell on his face. And he's just been super inconsistent throughout his career. He has these stretches. I don't think TJ Hawkinson, I think he's just a guy, probably.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. I mean, you look at him over statistically, throw out his rookie year, but just over the last 3 seasons, is pretty consistent in terms of per catch, per target.
Yeah.
He's like a solid player, but he doesn't do a lot after the catch. He doesn't make plays downfield. His explosive catch rate, I mean, you look at him compared, every tight end who has 50 or more catches, he's usually in the middle of the pack, 50 or more targets, in the middle of the pack or toward the bottom in explosive catch rate. So that's the thing with Hawkinson. If the targets go down, he's definitely going to be a bust if you're taking him in the 40s. Because he doesn't really.
Can I ask you guys this question then? Can I ask you guys this question? Because I feel like it's the same conversation we've had here. And you know, a lot of fantasy football discusses this over the past 3 years. If that's the case, Adam, and I think it is, and let's say Jordan Addison doesn't eat that much into his target share, but he eats a little bit into it. Like, what is the value of drafting these tight ends in the 40 to 60 range if they're not giving you a weekly difference? Like, I feel like they continue to get pushed up year after year just because you need a tight end. You have to start one every year, but that only matters if they're giving you a weekly edge. And I know Travis Kelce, I love drafting Travis Kelce. I believe in the weekly edge, but when we're talking about these guys like Hawkinson, like you said, Adam, low and explosive rate, maybe losing targets, even so, is not really making that much of a weekly difference, averaging 13 PPR points with those 2 big games against the Giants. Like, to me, that's when you're starting to just see these guys have these crazy high ADPs because they play tight end. And that's
the thing. That's what happens. And it's kind of true at every position, but maybe not wide receiver, but you see it at running back too. You know, we talk about the dead zone, and it's what happens is the high end guys are such difference makers that it tends to, there's like an anchor effect for everyone else where the high-end guys are so impactful that you want them, and they make such a difference, and they're worth a first-round pick in this case for Travis Kelce. And then it kind of like, well, I can't get Travis Kelce, but Mark Andrews is a difference maker. He's not as much of a difference maker, but I can talk. And so he gets pushed up because it's like, well, if I don't get Mark Andrews, then it's TJ. And then you have Mark Andrews gets pushed up a little bit. And then the next group gets pushed up a little bit because it's like, well, if I don't take TJ Hawkinson in the 4th round, you know, the rest of those guys might go off in rapid succession. Then I'm starting Dalton Schultz on the Texans. And I think that's what happens is the middle class at tight end consistently gets pushed up. You mentioned TJ Hawkinson a couple years ago when his ADP got really inflated when people were projecting a breakout. That's kind of what happened, where it's like, if it goes right, he could be a must start tight end. And I think it's easy to talk yourself into it in a way that probably doesn't actually help you win fantasy games.
That's the thing for me, because like if you're trying to win fantasy football leagues, right, what you're giving up when you take these guys in rounds 4 to 6, you're giving up, and you're not always going to get these guys, right? But you're giving up the opportunity to draft last year's Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2 years ago's Cooper Kupp. We're going in that exact same round 4 to round 6
argument. I hate it. I think it's
because
so.
those guys can win you fantasy leagues, but
you know
TJ
what?
Hawkinson's not going to win you a fantasy league.
You don't even have to. You don't even have to go with the Amon-Ra St. Brown Cooper Kupp right now to draft TJ Hawkinson in an NFC league. You're passing on Deebo Samuel, like guys in the same range. Deebo Samuel, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper. Like those guys are going to be bigger difference makers.
Of course. Okay, so listen, I think we've established that we think TJ Hawkins's ADP is insane, and I think that any tight end going any other than Andrews and Kelsey, round 4 is not the right time to take tight end 3.
Yes.
So what about round 5? Maybe. What about round 6? Round 6, I'm definitely in the game. So, but my point is, you can make all these cases. Oh, you're passing up these guys. Sure. But if you look at the guys who were drafted in round 5 last year, well, Damian Harris and Brandon Cooks and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Allen Robinson and Michael Thomas were drafted in round 5 last year. So I don't want to just act like tight ends are the only positions that are, and that's what we do at the running back dead zone too. Oh, why are you taking these guys? I'm going to give you the 2 or 3 examples of wide receivers who went off when they were drafted in round 5. You know what? Every position has busts once you get past the first few rounds. I mean, that's just the nature of it. So I think we can identify clearly that round 4 for tight end 3 is a mistake. I personally do not want to take my tight end unless it's Kelsey or Andrews until round 6 or later. So that would be my next question to you quickly, guys. When do you feel comfortable taking tight end 3, whether it's Hawkinson for Chris or Waller for Dan?
Yeah, it's end of round 5, early round 6.
Yep, you nailed it. I'd prefer round 6, but I could consider end of round 5.
Okay. Questions then. What was the most difficult decision you had to make when ranking your top 5?
The order of 3 through 7. Just any. I think the gap between any of them is so narrow that it's really just personal preference and how you want to build your team and those things. Maybe it's just how high should Travis Kelce go? Maybe that's the toughest.
That is tough for me. I keep moving him down. I started out with him 1 in January, and I know I'm not going lower than 6. I know he's in the top 6, but right now I think he's 5 or 6.
I love the case for 1. I won't do it either, but I just love the idea of it, Adam. I do, because you're not allowed to take Travis Kelce first overall, right? But meanwhile, this guy is never missed a game except for COVID in 9 years. So he's a supposed injury risk that's not actually an injury risk because he doesn't block, like, really. So he doesn't really take the physical beating that some of these guys take at tight end. I like the idea of Kelce at 1. I haven't done it yet, but I like it.
Well, what do you think? I mean, tight end premium.
My hardest thing.
Yeah. What was your hardest decision?
The hardest for me was putting Waller all the way up at 3 for sure. But I looked at it just like Chris did at 3 through 7. I just can't find much of a difference between these guys in the rankings. And then I'm just looking for upside. I'd like to play fantasy to win first. I'm a big, if you're not first, you're last kind of guy in fantasy. I'm looking to win leagues. I just don't see much league winning appeal with any of these tight ends outside of Waller 3 to 7, except for Pitts, who I don't like the quarterback situation. I think Drake London takes away targets as well. And then Goddard, who I would need an injury to A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith for that breakout to happen. I don't really see it possible with Hawkinson, and Kittle to me is just a very bad fantasy risk this year. To me, I don't like Kittle at all.
The Kittle thing is funny because now it's he can score touchdowns.
Yes.
When it was like he just can't. He's incapable of scoring touchdowns for years and years and years. And now he has this fluky touchdown stretch with Brock Purdy, and we're like, cool, George Kittle can score touchdowns again. And it's like, I think George Kittle is still right there with Travis Kelce in terms of the best tight ends in the NFL. And in terms of what he does as a football player, I think he's 1B. But it's just the 49ers offense is a math problem that's hard to solve. And we haven't, and it's not just that they have a lot of mouths to feed. They got a lot of guys who we haven't seen play together for more than 2 or 3 games at a time. It's such a weird thing about this offense for 3 years in a row now, where we've just like, what does it look like when Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle are all healthy? Well, we've seen it like, 9 games total? We've seen it.
We have McCaffrey in there too.
But now we have McCaffrey, and now we have a new QB that I think they only played 3 games with all of them healthy, plus Elijah Mitchell if you want to get into the RB. Like, it's such a difficult thing to project.
Yeah, I do have a lot to say about Kittle. I will save it, though, because my basic summary on Kittle is that George Kittle is unfairly compared to the George Kittle of, his 1,300 yard followed by like 1,100 yard season, whatever that was.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't really compare him to the other tight ends anymore. We just see he's not nearly as good as he used to be, but he's still like, he had a pay. If you just look at his games with Garoppolo, actually his games with Purdy, he was on pace for like 850 yards or something like that. I think there were 2 tight ends that had 850 yards last year. So I think we unfairly criticize Kittle. He's not what he used to be, but he still has not finished. I guess I'm saying everything I have to say about Kittle. 5 straight seasons.
Yes.
He's been a top 3 tight end per game in PPR and top 4 per game in non-PPR. So I know it's not as pretty and it's extremely inconsistent, but he still puts up good numbers. He's never going to be what he used to be. All right, we'll get it in a little bit later. My next question for you: which top 5 tight end has the widest range of outcomes? Kelsey's not really part of this discussion. But which top 5 tight end has the widest range of outcomes?
Pitts is the only answer, unless, like Dan, you don't rank Pitts in the top 5.
Yeah. I don't rank. I would have obviously said Pitts if he was in my top 5, but Pitts is just outside my top 5. So for me, it's Darren Waller who's made my top 5 for sure. I mean, you could see a situation where the Giants continued to do what they did from the second half of the season, which is a pass-first offense, or you could see them go back to the run game. And then Darren Waller's in like an Atlanta Falcons type situation where, yes, he's getting a lot of targets, but the team's not really moving the ball through the air. So that's a problem. So I can see it going a lot of different directions there.
Which top 7 tight end has the most upside other than Travis Kelce?
It's got to be Pitts, right?
Does it? What about Andrews?
Yeah, that's the tough thing, because Andrews is the only one who's finished ahead of Travis Kelce before. So it's hard to argue that anyone has more upside than 107 catches, 1,400 yards, and 9 touchdowns.
The thing with Andrews that scares me, though, is this is really the most target competition he's had by a wide margin at any point in his career. That's really what gets me. And also there's something Dave pointed out that I'm trying to find now that I thought was really interesting with Mark Andrews. So here he goes, including 2012, where obviously, he dealt with some injuries and Lamar wasn't playing. He averages 12.7. 2022. We didn't go back in time 10 years this time, not just yet. But he averaged 12.7, between 12.7 and 15.4 points per game. And then obviously he had 17.2 points per game in his breakout 2021, but he really only had that one breakout year. So I thought that was just interesting when we're thinking about taking this guy, between 30 and 40 overall. Again, like, if he's really only averaging under 15 fantasy points per game, is there value in that?
That's a lot of points, by the way, for a tight end. I mean,
in PPR for a tight end, for sure. Of course, for a tight end.
Not many tight ends average 15 points per game. You might get
but he's never done that outside of 2021.
No, yeah, it was only.
But he has done that in spurts, and then Lamar Jackson gets hurt and stuff like that. Like last year, I think if you look at what Mark Andrews did at the beginning before his injury,
that's the thing.
He was absolutely worth a 3rd round pick. So and then you have the question of the target competition. I am pretty unimpressed by the Ravens wide receivers.
Okay.
I could see that going different ways. Maybe Zay Flowers has a great year. Maybe Beckham's worth the $15 million they paid him. I don't really think he has huge target competition. I mean, I do understand it's more than what he has had before. I agree with that. But I don't know. If he's as good as I think he is, he still leads that team in targets.
I think the way to look at it is not necessarily that it's for sure harder target competition as much as it is an unknown. Again, it's a new offensive coordinator. It's more players around him. Target competition is a tough thing because players earn targets, right? And like, if you have Mark Andrews open, you're going to throw it to him. That's kind of how the thing works. It's oversimplifying, but it's largely how it works. Target share tends to stay pretty steady across quarterbacks and team changes for high-end wide receivers, at least. So I'm not too worried about the target share. I did ding him a point or two in my projections, but he's still, I think, a clear second among tight ends in my projections for target share.
The only thing I'll say regards to Andrews on the target share front is I do feel like just from watching the Ravens tape over these last few years, in that offense with Greg Roman, there were a lot of first reads for Mark Andrews. It was obviously a more condensed offense. It was heavier personnel packages. They didn't have a ton of speed on the field, and they weren't really going through I don't want to say they weren't going through full progressions. Marquise Brown, they kind of went through a different kind of system there, but a lot of it was funneled through Mark Andrews' system schematically. Am I definitely getting that from Todd Monken, or am I getting more of an 11 personnel? You might be Odell Beckham might be the first read on this play. Zay Flowers might be the first read on this play. I don't know. It's an unknown, and that scares me a little bit with the target volume there for Andrews.
But my response to that would be,
yeah,
there are probably a lot of times in DeAndre Hopkins offenses where he's schematically the first read, and it's like, that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know for sure that Mark Andrews is a Travis Kelce level player where you scheme your whole offense around him, but we've seen an elite offense schemed around Mark Andrews before in a high volume, in a high target share role. So I don't know if that's necessarily a Greg Roman thing. It was Charles Clay the number one target in Buffalo when Greg Roman was the top guy, or is it just that's what you do when you have Mark Andrews, right?
Yeah. So
yep.
My philosophy on Andrews is I draft him when the sort of sure things are off the board. Mm-hmm. So I think like the trio of Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, T. Higgins, I'll take them before Mark Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult for me when you talk about a guy like Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, those types of players. So when you start feeling like a little uncertain to me in round 3, little uncertain about who you're taking. Okay, now we've reached the point where the guys I feel like are definitely going to be must starts week after week are off the board. I think that's a great time to take Mark Andrews. Tough call is if you have like an early pick and you're early in the 3rd round and some of those guys are still on the board and you have no chance of getting Andrews in the 4th round. Do you pull the trigger? I think it's justifiable, but I'm mid-round 3 on Andrews. I'm basically at his ADP.
Yeah, in NFC drafts, he's sandwiched between Travis Etienne and Kenneth Walker. I think that's a perfect distillation of what you just said.
Yeah. Okay, so how about just all right, one word answer. Who do we think has more upside, Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts?
Kyle Pitts could be anything.
No, it's got to be Mark Andrews. It has to be. They're just not passing the ball in it.
I said one word.
What's the chance of them throwing more?
One word.
Mark Andrews.
One word. He said one word. Mark Andrews.
All right, that's 2 words, but I will not penalize you. Which top 7 tight end has the most downside?
It's Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, Pitts.
I feel like it might be Waller. That's fair. You're so similar to me.
It could just be, Waller I think has less performance risk. But he's also old enough where it could the wheels could completely fall off.
He looked good last year when I saw him on tape with the Raiders. He looked very good.
I agree. I mean, I didn't watch that much tape, but I watched a little, and I thought he looked good. And his per game averages, Chris, you mentioned Darren Waller per game. He played like 4 snaps of one game and had 0 yards. So if you took that game out, it's only like 5 more yards per game. But after he came back from the injury, he wasn't playing his full snap shares. He still absolutely abused a linebacker on a touchdown. I think he abused a cornerback on a touchdown later in the year. He definitely made some plays that most tight ends are not making. But, look, I mean, he's got Daniel Jones. There's a lot of downside there, but there's also a lot of potential there. I feel so similarly about Pitts and Waller this year.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the air bars are probably wider.
I will say that. One guy doesn't have Drake London bothering him for targets. That's all I'm saying.
That's fair, but the Giants do have 14 small wide receivers who, if they all stack on each other's shoulders, could be Drake London.
True.
Okay. We are going to take a break. And usually for the quarterback, running back, and wide receiver shows, we had the case for number 1. We're definitely not doing that segment. Only one tight end has the case for number 1 this year, I think. But maybe we could do the case for number 2. We'll be right back. All right, the case to be tight end 2. How many tight ends do you think could be tight end 2? Obviously, we think at least 5 of them could be tight end 3. How many do you think could be tight end 2 this year?
I think anyone from...
I have 3 guys.
I would say anyone through number 7 on my rankings for sure, and maybe Pat Freiermuth.
Oh, I like Freiermuth.
Whose name we haven't said yet. I don't think anyone else really has a path to number 2, but I think any of those 8 guys, 7 guys could get there.
As much as I like Freiermuth as a talent, he's also needs to be put in that Pitts Waller bucket of what the hell do we have at quarterback here? Kenny Pickett threw like 10 touchdowns last year in 14 games.
You're being extremely generous to Kenny Pickett.
That is right.
You just oversold his amount of touchdowns by 44%.
Oh my God.
He had 7 touchdowns last season, sir.
God, I thought
they had 2 quarterbacks last year. I think they threw 11 touchdowns on the season, 12.
Oh.
Yes, the team as a whole threw 12.
And they're bringing back the same offensive coordinator. How is that possible?
Yeah. I think there's a decent chance that we want nobody in that Steelers offense.
This reminds me so much of the 2021 Giants season where they had an awful offense, like last in the NFL. And they're like, we'll bring back Jason Garrett for next year because we have a young quarterback. It's really important to keep the continuity. You have to make sure he doesn't have to learn a new system. And I hate when NFL teams do that, when they value the continuity of redoing this, of being in the same system over just the idea that, no, the system didn't work. It was broken. We weren't calling the plays good. Like we weren't moving the ball.
What's the quote from the Joker in The Dark Knight? Everybody freaks out. Nobody cares if the plan is insane as long as there's a plan, something like that.
Yeah, the plan. Yeah, is that when he's in the bank? I'm bad with movie quotes. This is an Azer thing. Azer, you should know this quote.
I mean, you've been so you didn't know Seinfeld during the mic check. That was so embarrassing.
You didn't know
Dumb and Dumber. You never see Dumb and Dumber.
Never seen Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah. What the heck were we just talking about? I feel like if you're going to put Freiermuth's name in that discussion, I think Njoku has the outside chance as well, because he could be number 2 on the team in targets with a much better quarterback.
True.
But all right. So obviously a lot of guys could finish as tight end 2. I've said George Kittle was number 2 per game last year, and he's been, like I said, top 3 per game in 5 straight seasons. That's in PPR. That's amazing. Pitts, it's an upside projection. Hawkinson, it's a target thing. And he could score more touchdowns. I mean, there's no reason why a guy who had 129 targets last year and, was on a team that threw like the 3rd or 4th most passes in the NFL for only about half the year, why he can't score more than 6 touchdowns, which he's never done. Waller. Goddard, I actually don't think it's possible for Goddard to be tight end 2 unless one of the guys, Smith or Brown, misses 4 or more games. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
You're right, because even if that's the scenario, the Eagles still like 4th highest run rate in the NFL. So that's not going to change. They're a really good team running the football. So you're right. He would need an injury. That's why I don't put him in that mix. I don't really put Hawkinson in that mix either. Yeah, the team throws the football a lot, but I just don't see any way that he's going to, unless an injury to Jordan Addison happens.
Right.
Part of it is just the bar for being tight end 2.
Yes.
Tends to be pretty low. Like last year, George Kittle was 13.5 points per game. So it's like, if you're telling me that the number 2 tight end is going to score 13.5 points per game, yeah, I think there's like 8 guys who could do that, but that's not super impressive.
Last year, Travis Kelce outscored the number 2 tight end in fantasy by 102 fantasy points.
That's
absurd.
Nuts.
Yeah, it's insane. But you should not expect that to happen again.
Yeah, probably not.
It's a great talking point, but it's probably not going to happen again.
But like 60 points
probably will happen.
That's pretty reasonable.
Yeah. I think I feel like pretty done with this conversation. I don't know if there's anything.
I will say the Pitts thing, the one thing that I find weird is Drake London going 18 picks ahead of Kyle Pitts in ADP. Even if you let's say Drake London's better. I don't really think there's a case for Drake London being a better NFL player. Basically, the entire case is that he was more productive on a per game basis last season, but that's really skewed by the fact that he played in the 4 games where the Falcons looked like an offense from the 20th century rather than the 19th century. I don't think the 19th century had football, but you follow what I'm saying.
I think it may.
If you take the 4 games that Drake London played with Desmond Ridder, he averaged 41 yards per game. Kyle Pitts averaged 36. I can't see taking Drake London ahead of Kyle Pitts, if only because if you have to bet on someone in that offense, bet on the guy where if he scores 13.5 points per game, he might be the number 2 player at his position. If Drake London scores 13.5 points per game, he's like wide receiver 27.
Yeah, it's such a good point you make, because what if Kyle Pitts had played the last 4 games with
Exactly.
Ritter and no London? Then maybe he would have put up those big numbers. But the only thing that I disagree with is I do think you just have to go by ADP. I don't think you should necessarily rank London higher than Pitts, but because if you want one of them, you have to take London later. Like, you can't really wait on London.
That's why I think I'd rather just pass on London. Like if I'm going to make a bet on someone from that passing offense figuring it out, I think I'd rather just not take London. But I'm going to have like 15 teams, so I'll probably have London on one of them just because there is potential there. But I'm more likely to have Pitts on more of my teams than London.
I do think there was quite a bit of football played in the 19th century. The first Rose Bowl game was January 1st of 1902. And
okay, so yeah, there were probably a handful of football games in the 19th century, sure.
The first American football match was played on November 6th, 1869.
Oh, my God.
Man, Arthur Smith is that old?
Rutgers and Princeton. I did know Rutgers was in the first game. I didn't know much else about it.
Wow.
All right, so listen, I am going to work on this Apple Podcast issue here. There are only a few of them that I can actually read, so I will read them now. And I apologize because I always tell you that's a great way to have your question read, and I mean that. Here's a keeper question from C. Smith. Draft picks not affected, can keep player as long as possible. It's half PPR. Who do I keep of these 4? Jefferson, Henry, Adams, Olave, ETN, and Mixon. I'm going to make Jefferson's 1. So pick 3 of the next 5 and keep them forever. Henry, Adams, Olave, ETN, Mixon.
Can you repeat them again?
It's not going to be Mixon, I think, but 3 out of 5. Henry, Adams, Olave, ETN, Mixon.
Olave.
All right, Dan's keeping Olave.
Adams.
And is it just for 2023?
No,
keep forever. Keep forever. Olave, Adams, and Henry for me. I don't care how old Henry is. I don't want ETN. I don't want Mixon.
Yeah, I think I'd just go with Olave, ETN, and Adams.
Most people throw ETN in there, not me.
Yeah. Well, when you do Adams and Henry, that's pretty old. I could see maybe keeping one of the old guys, one of the geezers.
I'm not.
All right, this is the only other. No, I can't even read this. I can't even read this because the stupid thing. I'm sorry about that. It's just too long.
You know what this reminded me of?
What?
Have you ever seen the Bill O'Reilly bit with the teleprompter that wasn't working?
On the show? We'll do it live.
We'll do it live. Can't read the stupid thing.
That's tomorrow, and that's it for today. What does that mean? It goes crazy. It was somebody roasting me for my burnt ends fantasy Jeopardy.
Oh man, I've been hearing a lot of people.
Wait, so what's
my friend
the take?
Steve Hall was roasting the hell out of
you. Don't like burnt ends?
No, it's that
I did a fantasy Jeopardy answer, and it
made no sense.
Eats meat was the category, and it was like this meat is named after like the way it's cooked and the location on the animal, and nobody agreed with that.
Well, yeah, because it's not the location of the animal; it's the ends of the cut of brisket.
Okay, well, it's still on the animal, right? I guess like it's on the end. Yeah, no,
it's the worst question ever delivered in fantasy Jeopardy history.
It was an answer, not a question.
That is my favorite barbecue thing, by the way. Burnt ends, so incredible. John Brown's Smokehouse in Queens. If you guys want to meet up, that is my favorite barbecue spot in the city.
You know about John Brown's?
Oh, I've been to John
Brown's.
When
I lived in Astoria by Ditmars, I went to John Brown's at one point, Chris. It was absolutely disgusting. My roommate made fun of me 3 times a week at minimum.
It's so good.
I would go to the gym and then go to John Brown's right after every time.
Isn't that kind of defeating the purpose of going to the gym?
The total opposite.
That's why you
go to John
to
Brown's and you throw in 250 grams of protein after your workout. Adam, learn about this stuff.
Come on, get swole, Adam.
All right, here's one question I'm going to read from Ross. He says, I just had my performance review at work. We had to complete a self-assessment and look at ways to improve. As a CBS podcast crew, I was wondering if there are any specific areas you are focusing on individually or collectively this season to improve on and hone your analyst power.
Oh, boy.
It's a
Believe it or
loaded
not.
question.
Believe it or not, I actually always try to talk less. It's really hard for me. And I was maybe when I'm in my 50s, like 11 years from now, I'll be able to master that. But I am trying.
I have one that I need to try to do better on, and that is when you have a good point that pops in your mind, wait till the other person is finished speaking before you drop
It's
your
tough.
point in.
It's
And
tough.
that
That
is
is
very tough to do.
Yeah, yeah.
That's for me. It's not interrupting is my biggest
Yeah,
problem.
not interrupting is very difficult, Chris.
You just did it,
Yeah.
Adam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and especially in like this we're not in the same room. We're on slightly different delays in terms of like where our it's
David A.
it's hard, you know.
Yeah.
But I think you guys are great.
Thank you. I think you guys are great
You
too.
too.
I think I'm going to be more complimentary to the people I'm on the show with.
I also want to do a better job this year. This is more analyst based of utilizing the data that we have at our disposal. I don't know if we're allowed to say it, but we have a really good data source here at CBS Sports.
Oh, yeah. True
And
Media. I say it
True
all.
Media. There it goes. And there are ways to maximize the usage of True Media that I don't know that Dave Richard does a great job of, and Jacob Gibbs does a great job of. I need to sit down. I'm going to make Jacob Gibbs spend a half hour with me.
I
on
already
video
did
call.
this with you. I did this with you last
you
year,
didn't.
and you weren't even paying attention.
This is a lie. I always pay attention to Adam. Not one time have I not paid attention to you.
True Media is a game changer.
But yeah, no, that's I'm using. I mentioned the Dallas Goddard stat that was to get us back on the topic of fantasy football.
Yeah.
The Goddard stat that I mentioned, he is 48th among tight ends in end zone targets over the past 2 seasons. He is tied with, among others, Eric Tomlinson, Eric Sobert, Blake Jarwin, CJ Uzama, Noah Gray, and Chigakonkwo, who
So weird.
we like. But yeah, he's got 4 end zone targets over the past 2 seasons, courtesy of our friends at True Media.
There you go.
So easy to look that up. Just little filters, great stuff.
Yeah. It's so funny. It's like another thing I could do better at is shorter episodes. But every time we just spent like probably 5 minutes just BS, which is fine. But thank you everybody for watching, listening. We've got Beyond the Box Score tomorrow. We are back Monday because we work Monday. And then Tuesday you'll hear Dynasty. But if you're taking a long weekend or whatever, have an amazing 4th of July, USA. And we'll talk to you tomorrow on Fantasy Football Today.